The most important, most anticipated moment of the 10-year Marvel Cinematic Universe was the arrival of Spider-Man. No, that's not quite right. The most important moment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is when everything in that universe finally joined Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is the Marvel Universe. He is the face of the brand, the comics, the stories, the characters. The Marvel landscape, the entertainment landscape would not be what it is today without Spider-Man. What started in the comics in the 1960s and powered through to the movie theaters today was cultivated through 5 decades on the small screens at home. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Spider-Man on TV. Spider-Man was created by Steve Ditko and Stan Lee. Might have been a little bit of Jack Kirby mixed in there. Regardless of how the percentages of creativity are assigned, Spider-Man made his first appearance in Amazing Fantasy number 15 in 1962, which was quickly followed up by Amazing Spider-Man number 1 in 1963, after he proved to be so incredibly popular with readers. So popular, so influential that he not only became a big seller on the newsstands, but changed the entire approach to superheroes from both Marvel and DC Comics, and broadened the entire audience of comic book readers by appealing to an older demographic. Spider-Man raised the visibility of the entire Marvel Universe, and within 5 years of his creation, made his way onto television and into the homes and lives of viewers around the world. Superheroes were already big on television. Superman, starring George Reeves, aired from 1952 to 1958. Batman, starring Adam West, began in 1966. DC's Superman was already being featured in cartoons, as were an assortment of Avengers in a cartoon called The Marvel Superheroes. Spider-Man was a natural fit to headline his own cartoon for the fall season beginning in 1967. Spider-Man first aired on US television in September of 1967. Season 1 episodes featured Spider-Man's now classic, now Hall of Fame, Rogues Gallery for the first time on television. Heck, for the first time anywhere for many viewers. Due to budget and/or animation limitations, compromises were made with respect to the detailing on Spider-Man's costume. Web lines are absent on his torso, as if the animators were just like, "This is hard, can we just not do it?" Spider-Man reused a lot of animation sequences. Spider-Man swinging this way, Spider-Man swinging that way, Spider-Man swinging in another direction. Classic looping backgrounds, the same shots flipped or reversed or slightly recolored. It was all part of trying to deliver a more cinematic appearance than previous Marvel animated series, but also trying to keep the budget under control. Paul Soles voiced Peter Parker and Spider-Man. You might recognize Paul as the voice of Hermie the Elf from the Rankin Bass movie Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, or maybe you recognize him from his work as Happy Hogan, Rick Jones, and Bruce Banner from Marvel's Hulk cartoons from 1966, or maybe you've seen him on a show called My 90-Year-Old Roommate, because the dude is still getting jobs today. Regardless of Spider-Man's increasing popularity, the second and third seasons were produced with even smaller budgets than the first. Where the first season featured classic villains like Dr. Octopus and the Lizard, new episodes opted for more generic villains, allowing for gross reutilization of footage from previously produced Ralph Bakshi animated series. From 1967 through 1970, Spider-Man cartoons captured a Marvel universe that was brilliantly colorful both in terms of the visuals and the musical score. It is a wonderful snapshot of the era in which the character was created and the true charm that allows a viewer to connect so easily. Of all the contributions to making Spider-Man a household name, the most important, the longest-lasting element of the cartoon is the theme song. With lyrics by Academy Award winner Paul Francis Webster and music by Bob Harris, generations of TV viewers, comic book fans, and people who don't even care about Spider-Man know at least some of the words in the tune without even thinking about it.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves.
Successive television and movie projects have attempted to introduce new musical cues, themes, or melodies, but none stick the way the original has. Spider-Man's first foray into television introduced the universally relatable character of Peter Parker, his sense of responsibility, his origin, and cast of characters to a much larger audience than was reading the comics at the time. It cemented his place as a highly influential pop culture icon and delivered an irreplaceable, iconic theme song that has been associated with the character for 50 years so far. In 1971, Children's Television Workshop, the production company that had been producing Sesame Street since 1969, premiered a new program called The Electric Company. It was aimed at kids who were ready to move on to something a little smarter, a little more mature than Sesame Street, and Toy Galaxy didn't exist yet. The Electric Company featured several actors who went on to prominence outside of their appearances on the show, including Morgan Freeman, Bill Cosby, and Rita Moreno, and, as of 1974, Spider-Man. Not only was it the first appearance of Spider-Man on television since 1970, it was the first live-action appearance and the first live-action production of any Marvel character since the Captain America serials of the 1940s. Each segment of Spider-Man was introduced with a comic book themed around the skit and maintained a comic page framing throughout. A voiceover narration moved the action along between illustrated panels and live-action sequences of Spider-Man facing off against his foe of the day. Unlike any other version of the character, this Spider-Man never speaks. The emphasis was on helping kids learn to read, so all of his dialogue was displayed in word balloons. The performances, the characters, the crimes, everything was way, way over the top, or such absolute ridiculousness that no court would ever convict. While Spidey was providing a public service helping kids learn to read, he was definitely trolling the bottom of the barrel with respect to the quality of villainy he was pitted against. Still, it was the first introduction of Spider-Man to a whole new generation of kids, and it was an introduction that made Spider-Man real, a living, breathing person interacting with other real people that kids already had a connection with. 1977 brought a totally different approach to Spider-Man. Well, not totally different. It was still live action and there was still a new audience being introduced to Spider-Man, but this was the first attempt to truly ground Spider-Man in the real world, with superheroic feats and radioactive powers taking a back seat to drama. Primetime superheroes and crime-fighting science fiction characters were already a thing and doing well in the ratings. The $6 Million Man, the Bionic Woman, Shazam, Wonder Woman. It was time for Marvel to get in the game, and Spider-Man was going to lead the way. Then step aside for the Hulk, who fared much better with his premiere just 2 months later. Spider-Man only lasted 2 seasons of 13 episodes. Due to the limitations of budget and visual effects technology of the time, the superheroics tend to happen when absolutely necessary and to a much more limited degree than in either the comics or the cartoons. Spider-Man's powers in general are toned down, allowing for a much more relatable character. Nicholas Hammond played Spider-Man and Peter Parker, who we joined during his university days, still living at home with his Aunt May, trying to make ends meet as a freelance photographer for the Daily Bugle. Even though the pilot performed well overall, it underperformed with the 18 to 49 adult demographic, which caused CBS to hesitate when it came time to actually order the series into production. They initially ordered 5 more episodes, and then after that, CBS just couldn't see spending the amount of money it cost to produce an episode to cater to that age group in that time slot. Season 2 was only 7 episodes. CBS tried to bring in an older audience, tapping the producer of $6 Million Man, Lionel Siegel. Characters were shuffled around, Spider-Man's powers were toned down just a bit more, but CBS canceled it out of fears of becoming known as a superhero network, what with their library having swelled to Spider-Man, Hulk, Wonder Woman, Captain America, Doctor Strange, and Shazam. And proving that the more things change, the more things stay the same, according to Wikipedia, its most vocal fans were also highly critical of it due to the Season 2 departures from the more comic book-like storylines and the lack of any recognizable supervillains from the Spider-Man comics. That said, I think this one time, they might have been right. Meanwhile, in Japan, in 1978, Marvel and Toei entered an agreement to trade licensing for a 3-year period. Toei could use Spider-Man, and Marvel got access to these super robots that would become the Shogun Warriors. Toei initially planned to have the actual Spider-Man appear on a show via some time travel wonkery, but the idea of doing something different with the characters, something that could be uniquely Japanese, the attraction was just too strong. In this version of Spider-Man, an alien named Garia crash lands on Earth. His ship, the Marveler, is discovered by Takuya Yamashito. Garia gives some of his blood to Takuya, which grants him superpowers since Garia happens to be a great warrior from the planet Spider. He was on the hunt for Professor Monster and the Iron Cross Army, who, by the way, destroyed Planet Spider and left him as the only surviving warrior. It is to you, Peter Parker, and it is to you, Takuya Yamashito, that this fight is passed. Garia also gives Takuya a mechanism to activate his costume, his webbing, and summon the Marveler, which, by the way, also transforms into a giant mech super robot, or for you Americans, a Zord called Leopardon. And since we're talking about Power Rangers, it would be negligent not to point out that Leopardon, that Spider-freaking-Man, is responsible for the introduction of the giant super robot, or Zord, to the Power Rangers-style programs in Japan, and therefore the United States. Live-action Japanese superhero programs existed before Spider-Man in 1978, but it was Spider-Man's introduction of the giant robot to the genre that locked in the final piece of the now 40-plus years of success that Power Rangers, or Super Sentai, as they are known in Japan, have had. Like the live-action Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man of 1977, this Spider-Man doesn't do much web swinging, but you gotta give the suit actor credit for being so much more comfortable and acting like, you know, Spider-Man. Jumping around, flipping, doing kicks. He's a righteous spider poser. If fans weren't happy with the differences between the comics and the US live-action Spider-Man, I can't imagine what they would have said about this. And in this case, they would have been wrong. Sentai Spider-Man was considered an obscurity and oddity for a long time, but in recent years, thanks to the internet, his visibility has increased considerably. In March of 2009, Marvel replayed the entire series on their website in the original Japanese with English subtitles. And in 2014, Takuya Yamashito and Leopardon made a guest appearance in the Spider-Verse crossover event in the comics with thousands of other alternate universe Spider characters like the Peter Parker, Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2099, and Spider-Ham. It officially recognized Takuya, Leopardon, and the entire series as Marvel canon, existing in an alternate dimension. In 1981, 11 years since the production of original Spider-Man animation, the newly created Marvel Productions put him back in the spotlight on Saturday mornings. Marvel Productions was the film and television wing of Marvel Entertainment Group, created as a result of the purchase of animation studio DePatie Freeling Enterprises by Marvel's owner at the time, Cadence Industries. Is it DePatie? I don't know. DePatie Freeling Enterprises, or DFE, released the new Fantastic Four cartoon in 1978 and Spider-Woman in 1979. Spider-Man made a few guest appearances on Spider-Woman and, as if it wasn't going to happen anyway, led the rollout of the new Marvel Productions animation slate. To make up for the absence of an ongoing, narrative-driven Spider-Man on television and in the cinemas, to help broaden the appeal of the entire slate of Marvel Comics characters, Marvel Productions introduced not one, but two new Spider-Man cartoons on the same day in September of 1981. The first put the focus on Spider-Man and was simply called Spider-Man. The second opened up the Marvel character library a bit with the addition of fire and ice-themed mutants, Firestar and Iceman, for a show called Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Both debuted on the same day with a similar tone, visual style, and musical cues, and while it would be totally understandable to think that the two shows were from the same continuity and somehow connected, the productions were, technically, separate and never really acknowledged the existence of each other. In fact, characters that appear on both shows, like Spider-Man, aren't even voiced by the same actors. Both Spider-Man and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends feature sharper, faster action with more consistent, more accurate character models than the cartoons from the late 60s. And while it may sound silly to say, it was actually more realistic as well. There's a much better sense of geography and logical progression of action within scenes, the kinds of things that viewers expect, whether they're aware of it or not, as television entertainment, and in this case, television entertainment for kids, matured within a few decades. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends introduced a new character to the Marvel Universe with Firestar when the original character Marvel intended to use, the Fantastic Four's Human Torch.
Johnny Blaze.
No, close.
Wait, Johnny Torch?
No.
Close. Human Johnny.
That's close.
Is it Blaze Torch?
Was tied up in licensing limbo for a potential project that was never produced. She fulfilled the fire and ice theme Marvel was seeking and was popular enough that she was incorporated into the comics continuity proper in 1985. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends also cast Stan Lee as the narrator, getting about as close as you could get to a pure Marvel Comics experience on screen and, for an entire generation of kids, forever associating Stan's name and voice with Marvel and Spider-Man.
Face front, heroes. This is Stan Lee. Believe it or not, you asked for today's story.
Spider-Man ran for 26 episodes from 1981 to 1982, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends 24 episodes from 1981 to 1983, but their real influence would be in their continual syndication after their initial runs. Both programs would run for the next 2 years from 1984 to 1986, and then again later as part of the Marvel Action Universe with RoboCop and Dino Riders for 4 more years beginning in 1988, ending in 1991. In 2009, video game news and pop culture website IGN named Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends the 59th best animated series of all time, just ahead of Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers and right behind He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Spider-Man proper did not rank, but it's possible that voters did not realize they were 2 different shows. It was only 3 years between the last appearance of Spider-Man and/or Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends on TV as part of the Marvel Action Universe and the debut of the 1994 Spider-Man series, also called Spider-Man, but it had been over a decade since the production of any new Spider-Man cartoons. Inspired by the success of Fox's X-Men the Animated Series, which was inspired by the success of Batman the Animated Series, which was inspired by the success of the Batman movie in 1989 and Batman Returns in 1992, not to mention the record-setting popularity and success of these self-titled comics, Spider-Man hit TV screens in November of 1994. This Spider-Man was written and directed with a much faster pace than previous series and had the benefit of being produced in the future of 1994, enabling it to take advantage of all the heroes and villains that had become a part of the Spider-Man universe between the end of production of Spider-Man and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and this Spider-Man. There were new characters, new scenarios, and new approaches to be explored with a character that had been around for nearly 3 decades, but still felt new, fresh, and exciting.
Saturday morning on Fox.
There's web in your eyes.
Go where you've never gone.
So fasten your safety belt.
See what you've never seen.
You lame brain. Nice to see you too.
It's the world you've been waiting for.
He nails the dismount.
Watch the all-new adventures of Spider-Man Saturday morning on Fox Kids.
Comics in the 90s were more mainstream than ever and driving pop culture at all levels, especially after the birth of Image Comics in 1994. There was a comic renaissance going on in the books, on television, and in the theaters. Spider-Man, even on Saturday mornings, was appointment viewing. It was a well-produced cartoon that was able to straddle the line between the young adult audience and the kid audience. It hit that magic point where it could be considered teenage viewing that younger kids would want to step up to, as opposed to being too young for teens who would easily dismiss it. Spider-Man was the mainstream introduction for a lot of characters like Venom and Carnage that had never been in any kind of Marvel cartoon before, characters that are now a part of Spider-Man's core mythology. It also ran through the classic library of villains, giving each one a modern 90s makeover. Doc Ock, Vulture, Mysterio, the Lizard. No one missed out on an opportunity to take a swing at Peter Parker, and no one was overlooked by Toy Biz in the toy aisle. Spider-Man in the 90s had Marvel's comics, animated productions, and toy manufacturing come together to move product across all 3 fronts, even as Marvel itself was undergoing a comprehensive restructuring of its entire business, entering and emerging from bankruptcy. A bankruptcy that would ultimately see Marvel purchased by Toy Biz, a toy company that they owned. A toy company that had exceeded their own ability to connect with a larger audience and make stacks and stacks of cash. Spider-Man ran for a then record 5 seasons of 65 episodes through 1998. It was the longest running Marvel animated series at the time. It had incorporated characters from all over the Marvel universe and successfully once again brought Spider-Man to a position of prominence in television and in mainstream pop culture. Spider-Man was still a bankable character, and Fox was looking to keep him on the schedule in 1999. In 1994, Spider-Man was produced in-house by Marvel Productions. On the other side of the Marvel Universe, also running on Fox, the X-Men were produced by Saban Entertainment. Fox was hoping to keep Spider-Man on the schedule and reduce the budget. Meanwhile, due to ongoing litigation between Sony, MGM, and Marvel over the film rights to Spider-Man, Fox and Saban were prevented from using Spidey's proper costume and many of the characters from his universe. The new Saban Spider-Man series takes place in a world that allowed them to sidestep these issues and tell some unique Spider-Man stories. This Spider-Man is set on an alternate Earth, a counter-Earth on the far side of the sun, where the High Evolutionary rules over a planet with his army of human-animal hybrids. With J. Jonah Jameson's son John as a partner in the battle, to save Counter-Earth, Spider-Man fights with the Rebellion to take back the planet for freedom, the future, and just plain normal monkey-evolved humans. But these significant changes from what Spider-Man fans were used to, combined with a lot of competition from other cultural phenoms like Digimon, Pokemon, and Power Rangers, Spider-Man Unlimited was canceled after just a few episodes. It would return for the full run of its 13 episodes during the 2000 season, but would result in Spider-Man taking a break until after industry conditions would allow for the use of a proper Spider-Man. Spider-Man the New Animated Series debuted in 2003 following Spider-Man's box office success in 2002. A feature film had been in the works, well, we'll just say forever. Different studios, different directors, different writers, different actors attached to star, but when Spider-Man finally hit theaters and once again reinforced his status as a pop culture icon, Marvel and Sony looked to maintain that success on the small screen during the production of the first sequel. Produced by Marvel Entertainment and animation studio Mainframe Entertainment, distributed by Sony Pictures Television, Spider-Man the New Animated Series first aired on MTV in July of 2003. It approached the Spider-Man mythology more in line with the 2002 film and other recent popular action sci-fi films like The Matrix and X-Men's. You ever see The Matrix?
I have seen X-Men's.
Okay. Movie branding tied the series to the film, even if it wasn't directly in continuity. But it was dark, hip, stylish, on trend. It is very 2003. The series is fully rendered with then cutting-edge computer-generated animation and featured an all-star cast. Neil Patrick Harris as Spider-Man, Lisa Loeb as Mary Jane, Ian Ziering as Harry Osborn, and lots of guest appearances by performers like Rob Zombie, Jeremy Piven, Michael Dorn, Kathy Griffin, Michael Clark Duncan reprising his role as the Kingpin, and some guy named Jeffrey Combs. Spider-Man the New Animated Series was definitely aimed at an older audience and even included some slightly adult language that normally wouldn't even be considered were it a Saturday morning type production. Being on MTV allowed for more creative freedom with more adult intensity to the storylines, action, and overall presentation than all previous Spider-Man series. Don't get the wrong idea here, though. It's not rated R or anything, and certainly tame by the standards of what can be shown to any age audience on YouTube these days. But considering that previous generations of Spider-Man cartoons had limitations on whether or not Spider-Man could actually strike a villain with a closed fist, this was progress, this was intense, and yeah, this was adult. Even with the budget, the series still had a tight timeline. Production delays on some of the episodes resulted in some episodes being broadcast out of order chronologically. Ultimately something that only affected the initial airings and isn't an issue today. It's an easy fix on the DVD release. Spider-Man the New Animated Series was well received, but not well enough that it was renewed for a second season. After 3 big-budget film releases, the last of which was easily the least of which, Spider-Man fatigue set in. That said, Marvel and Sony looked to lighten things up and take a reboot approach to Spider-Man, sort of, by refocusing on the core of the mythology, lightening up, and having fun. With character designs by Sean Galloway, the Spectacular Spider-Man is the essence of Spider-Man, of every previous era of Spider-Man, condensed into a smooth, sharp, colorful series that doesn't cater directly to kids or to young adults. It is entertainment for everyone who loves Spider-Man. In retrospect, it was a great decision to separate it from the movie that killed the first era of the Spider-Man movie franchise. For all the strengths that Spectacular Spider-Man had, enough to get it renewed for a second season, it was ultimately a victim of circumstance. Ratings were good, but not quite good enough to trigger an automatic third season. Sony had agreed to release television rights back to Marvel as part of their continuing use of Spider-Man in theaters. However, ownership of the Spectacular Spider-Man series was retained by Sony. This meant that Sony couldn't broadcast another season of Spectacular Spider-Man if they made it, and Marvel couldn't make more of the show without buying it from Sony. All of that combined with the purchase of Marvel by Disney in 2009, and Disney having their own plans about where to go with Spider-Man animation, meant a premature end to one of the best Spider-Man series ever created. Disney knows how to make entertainment, movies, TV, drama, animation, video games, toys, books. Disney has had it all covered for a very long time. In 2009, Disney purchased Marvel for $4 billion and $2 million.
4.2 billion.
$4.2 billion? Disney paid a lot of money for Marvel and had their own ideas about what was going to be successful, how much they wanted to spend on it, and who was going to produce it. They wanted to make a clean break and produce everything with their own people, their own designs, and sever all ties with the pre-existing creations by Sony. They only wanted to be partners with Sony as long as and to the extent of legal obligations. This was one more place where they could sever those ties forever. Ultimate Spider-Man goes in a completely different direction than any previous series, including Spectacular. This Spider-Man spends a lot of his time breaking the fourth wall, addressing the viewer directly, more like Deadpool than Spider-Man ever did, on screen or in the comics. And like, holy crap, does he not stop talking. He's supposed to be wisecracking, but sheesh. That said, Spidey's been getting younger, aka more obnoxious, for years. Earlier versions of Spider-Man really didn't put any emphasis on the teenager part. Previous series put him in his mid-20s at best, even when he was in college. Nicholas Hammond was 27 when he portrayed him on the TV show, as was Tobey Maguire. Andrew Garfield was 29. Tom Holland was 19 when they shot Civil War. The last two animated versions really make him sound and act even younger. This one more than any other, and part of that is the way that Spider-Man makes his jokes and references and cutaways, not just the actual tonal quality of his voice. Surely an effort to engage more directly with the intended audience demographic.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Unique to this Spider-Man is the influence of the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe and his place in it. While previous animated series would stay relatively within the scope of his comic appearance, this version does that dance with his place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is not only the biggest moneymaker, but the loudest voice. The MCU reaches the most people when it comes to what the core ideas that make Spider-Man Spider-Man relative to the mainstream audience. Nick Fury, S.H.I.E.L.D., the Avengers all play a part in Peter's life where in the past they have barely been mentioned. 4 seasons and 104 episodes allows a lot of time to explore things, places, and concepts that have never been covered by Spider-Man cartoons. But like, how many times do you really want to see Dr. Octopus?
6.
6? Ultimate Spider-Man took Spider-Man everywhere, had him interact with just about everyone he could within the restrictions of current Marvel/Disney licensed properties. Not to mention the inclusion and expansion of concepts related to the Spider-Verse, the big crossover event that took place in Spider-Man comics in 2014. As previously mentioned, it's the event that brought together Spider characters from thousands of different realities and alternate Earth timelines. Ultimate Spider-Man carried on the spirit of that crossover event as characters like Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2099, and Spider-Ham all had a shot at the animated spotlight. Ultimate Spider-Man ran from 2012 to 2017, a testament to Disney's ability to maintain the freshness of the series over that amount of time and to allow it to bridge the release of 2 different versions of the character in theaters. It is the longest running Spider-Man series ever. It is the one that has defined the character on television for a new generation of fans. It is the show by which the success of every series that follows it will be compared against. August 19, 2017, Marvel's Spider-Man, or simply but in more difficult terms to reference, just plain Spider-Man, debuted on Disney XD. The series once again takes the character back to the beginning, back to his roots, back to his early days, where new viewers can pick up from the events of the films and see how Spider-Man started out learning the spider ropes to become the great hero that he will be, even if it isn't necessarily in the same continuity as the films. While different versions of Spider-Man on TV have dealt with Spider-Man's origin and the early days of his superhero career, this is certainly the youngest interpretation from the outset, complete with homemade hoodie costume as introduced in the movie Spider-Man Homecoming the same year. It borrows a lot from Ultimate Spider-Man as far as youth, speech pattern, humor style. It remembers that he's a teenager, and teenagers are energetic and sometimes really dumb. Both the hoodie suit and the traditional spider suit are featured in the series. It's amazing that after all these years, that original suit is still so iconic and appropriate, but that's the lasting power of the character, created back in the 60s. That's what fans around the world were able to connect with then and today. From his first appearance in 1962, it was clear that Marvel had introduced something that was timeless and appropriately put him out in front, the focus of the entire brand to lead the way for all the other characters. The X-Men, the Avengers, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and whatever comes next trace back through the enduring power of Spider-Man. Thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy. Share this video and let us know in the comments down below, A, what was the first Spider-Man series you can remember seeing, and B, which one is actually your favorite? For me, A would have to be the Electric Company, and B, I gotta go with Japanese Spider-Man. Even though Ultimate Spider-Man has Spider-Ham, I gotta go with the emissary from hell, rocking the giant robot. Bot beats ham, in this case. It's shirts. Bot beats ham.
Cut.